Look around the cookout next time you're at one. Everybody's plates are moving. Somebody's fighting over the aux cord like it's a court case. Kids are running through the yard, and the smoke off the grill is doing that thing where it makes everybody squint and lie about how they like it. And then there's him, sitting in the one chair with a view of the whole yard, the gate, the driveway, the door. Drink in his hand, but he's not really drinking it. Laughing at the joke, but half a beat behind everybody else, because some part of him is always running math the rest of the room isn't running. You ask him what's wrong and he tells you, "Nothing, man, I'm good." And here's the part that'll get you, he's not lying. He is good. He's just never once in 50-something years sat with his back to a door. You ever notice that? You ever notice how some men can be in a room full of family, full of love, full of noise, and still be standing guard? You know this man. Maybe he's your father. Maybe he's your uncle, your coach, your husband, the brother from the block who's got a corner office now but still checks his mirrors twice like somebody's tailing him. Every family's got one. Every barbershop's got three. Now, not every man carries every piece of this the same way. Some carry more of it, some less. Some set parts of it down along the way. But if you've already got a face in your mind, you know exactly who we're talking about. Stay with me. Because this isn't a story about anger, and it isn't a story about a hard man. This is a story about a code, and about a man who's been carrying it so long, he forgot he ever put it on. Here's the thing nobody tells you when you're young enough to still be scared of him. None of this is random. That stillness, that scanning, that refusal to be caught soft, caught slipping, caught off guard, none of it fell out of the sky. It was built. Piece by piece, situation by situation, tested and reinforced in real rooms with real stakes, the same way a man builds a house differently if he knows for a fact it's going to storm. You don't question a man for boarding his windows if he's lived through enough hurricanes. You ask what the weather was like where he's from, and the weather was rough. Now hold on, I'm not talking about excuses. I'm not handing you poor upbringing like it's a diagnosis that explains everything and lets everybody off the hook. I'm talking about something more precise than that. I'm talking about a functioning system of behavior, built with intention, refined through consequence, that kept an entire generation of men alive in conditions most people watching this have never had to survive for a single afternoon. This is survival architecture, and once you see it as architecture instead of attitude, the whole man starts to make sense. You've seen him at the barbershop, loud, cracking jokes, ranking on somebody's haircut, and then a stranger walks in and the rhythm of the whole room shifts just slightly. Nobody says a word about it, but everybody clocked it. Him first, half a second before anybody else. You've seen him at work, the only one in the meeting who never raises his voice and never lets his face move, even when he's the one getting talked over. Because somewhere along the way, he learned that a black man's anger reads different in a conference room than everybody else's does. So he traded volume for something quieter and just as sharp. You've seen him at church, singing the loudest, amen-ing right on beat, hugging on people twice his size like he's trying to squeeze the hurt out of them. And then you've seen that same man get pulled over on the drive home and watch his whole voice change. Hands at 10 and 2. Yes, officer. No, officer. Calm as still water on the surface, running calculations underneath that would make an accountant tired. You've seen him driving through his own neighborhood, windows cracked, doing exactly the speed limit, nodding at the man on the corner he's known for 30 years, keeping the same eyes on the street he's kept since he was 12 years old. You've seen him at the kitchen table, quiet, not because he's got nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way he learned that a quiet man is a controlled man, and a controlled man doesn't hand anybody a single thing they could use against him. You've seen him on the porch in the same chair at the same hour, like he's clocking in for a shift nobody assigned him, just watching the street the way some men watch a fire, out of respect for what it can do. You've seen him at the funeral. And Lord, he's been to too many of those. Standing in the back with his jaw set like a hinge, not crying, not because he isn't broken, but because breaking in public was never on the short list of things he was allowed to do. Now sit with that for a second. The barbershop, the job, the church, the traffic stop, the block, the kitchen table, the porch, the funeral, Every single one of those is a different room administering the same test, and he's passing every one of them. That's the skill. That's also the exhaustion. Let's rewind, because you cannot understand this man without understanding the block he came up on. We're talking about men born somewhere between 1965 and 1980. Gen X, not the civil rights generation, the children of it. They came up in the gap right after the marches, right after the assassinations, right after the country told their parents, "We hear you," and then went ahead and built the next 50 years without asking what came next. These are the latchkey kids. Key on a string around the neck, house empty till 6, because both parents were working, or one parent was working 2 jobs, because the factory jobs that used to hold a black neighborhood together were already leaving town, and they didn't leave by accident. Whole sections of American cities had been mapped out decades earlier, literal red lines drawn around black neighborhoods on federal housing documents, telling banks exactly where not to invest a dollar. That's not a rumor passed down at the barbershop. That's documented federal policy. Historian Richard Rothstein laid it out block by block in his book The Color of Law, and what he found was that residential segregation in this country wasn't an accident of taste. It was engineered. So picture the setup. A generation of boys growing up in neighborhoods deliberately starved of investment, right as crack hit in the 80s, right as the government declared a war on drugs that landed almost exclusively on their doorsteps and almost nowhere else. Legal scholar Michelle Alexander later gave that era a name. She called it the new Jim Crow, a system that took a generation of fathers, older brothers, and uncles and rooted a staggering number of them straight into prison, frequently for the same behavior that earned other neighborhoods a warning and a ride home. That's the weather system these boys were raised under. And here's the thing about weather: you don't wait for it to pass. You learn how to dress for it. You put on the coat and you zip it all the way up, and you get so good at wearing that coat that 30 years later, long after the storm has technically passed, you don't even register you're still wearing it. It's not a coat anymore. It's just your skin. So the code: respect first, never back down, handle it yourself, don't call attention, don't show soft. That code was never a character flaw. It was a tool. Sociologist Elijah Anderson spent years living in and studying inner-city neighborhoods and gave this whole system a name: the code of the street. An actual, functioning set of rules governing how respect got earned, kept, and defended in places where the police weren't reliably showing up in time, and the courts weren't reliably on your side once they did. In a world like that, respect becomes currency. Real currency, not vanity, insurance. If people know you don't back down, they think twice before testing you. If people believe you'll retaliate, they think twice before crossing you in the first place. Most of these men never wanted to live by that code. They inherited an economy where the law wasn't protecting everybody equally, and respect was the only insurance policy some of them could actually afford the premium on. There's a second piece to this, and it's got a name too. Researchers Richard Majors and Janet Mancini-Bilson studied it and called it cool pose, a deliberate performance. The walk, the talk, the flat, unreadable expression, built specifically to project strength and hang onto some control in a world constantly trying to strip control away from you. It's armor. Not who the man is underneath, what the man built to protect who he is underneath. You see where I'm going with this? The stillness at the cookout, the double mirror check, the "I'm good" man on autopilot. That's not coldness, that's engineering. Now let me lighten this up for a second, because the man is not just heavy. He is also, frequently, hilarious, whether he's trying to be or not. This is the same man who can de-escalate an actual altercation in a parking lot with one look and a calm, "Aight, we good, my man," and then go home and completely lose his composure because somebody moved his remote control 2 inches to the left. He will stand toe-to-toe with a man twice his size without blinking, but he cannot, will not, does not know how to say "I love you" without slapping a man or a bruh on the end of it like a pressure valve. Love you, man. Emotion delivered and safely diffused in the same breath. He'll wear the same pair of work boots for 15 years till they're basically a science experiment, but let somebody breathe on his sneakers. He answers "How you feeling" with "I'm blessed," regardless of what his actual blood pressure is doing at that exact moment. And if you ask him whether he's mad, the answer, 100% of the time, is, "I'm not mad. I'm just saying." Which, if you know that means he is extremely mad, and he is about to say quite a lot. We laugh because it's true. But stay with me, because that same deflection, "I'm not mad, I'm just saying," is the exact same muscle he's been flexing his whole life to survive rooms that were never safe for him to be fully honest in. The joke and the wound come from the same place. They usually do. Let me bring this back around, because here's where it gets real. That man is not 25 anymore. He's 50, 55, and the bill for 30 years in that armor is starting to come due. He's been to more funerals in the last 5 years than he can count on both hands. Some from bullets that caught up decades late, some from time served that never really ended when the sentence did. Some from the kind of chronic stress that just quietly wears a body down until the heart gives out 10 or 20 years too early. He's watching his circle thin out, one at a time, men who were every bit as strong, every bit as controlled, every bit as fine as he's always claimed to be. And every single time it happens, he stands in the back of another church, jaw set like a hinge, and he doesn't cry and nobody checks on him, because nobody ever thinks to check on the strong one. That's the part nobody talks about. Here's what 3 decades in that armor actually costs a man in real terms. It costs him his health. There's research on this specifically. Dr. Sherman James coined a term for it back in the 80s, John Henryism, named after the old folk legend of the man who worked himself to death trying to outperform a machine. James found that black men who relied on high-effort coping, pushing through chronic stress, staying calm under pressure, refusing to let the strain show, carried significantly higher rates of hypertension than men who didn't cope that way. The body keeps a ledger, even when the man refuses to. It costs him closeness. A man who spent 30 years being unreadable on purpose does not flip a switch the moment he walks through his own front door. His wife married a fortress with excellent taste in cologne. His kids grew up loved, deeply loved, don't mistake this, but loved through provision more than conversation. And somewhere in all of that is the regret, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the birthday he missed because he was covering a shift, the son who stopped calling as much, the daughter who learned to stop asking him how he really feels because the answer was always the same 3 words, the woman he loved but never quite let all the way in, so she eventually stopped knocking, the father he never got to say, "I love you" to out loud, only in a program at a funeral, because by the time he found the words, there was nobody left standing there to hear them. It costs him companionship, too. Vulnerability was never safe where he came up, so he never built the muscle for it. And now he's got a phone full of numbers and maybe 1 or 2 men he could actually call at 2 in the morning and just say, "I'm not doing good," without flinching. Loneliness doesn't announce itself with a bang. It moves in quiet and sits in a man who's surrounded by people at every cookout and still feels like nobody's fully seen him in 20 years. And it costs him the right to fall apart, even now, even at 55. Even with his own father gone, even grieving a friend he buried in the spring, even sitting on news from a doctor he hasn't told his wife about yet. He still feels, somewhere underneath all that composure, like breaking down is a debt he was never issued permission to collect on. That's emotional invisibility, fully present in every room of his life and fully unseen in every one of them at the exact same time. Now hold on before you start feeling sorry for him. Understand something clearly. That code worked. It kept him alive in situations that took other men out. It kept food on a table when the plant closed and the jobs left town. It kept him out of a system that was actively hunting for a reason to swallow him whole, while it let other men walk for less. It taught his own sons, word for word, exactly how to survive a traffic stop, a lesson plenty of fathers in this country will never once have to give. That mask was not weakness. That mask was mastery. Don't you dare mistake this for a story about a broken man. This is a story about a man who won, who is still standing, still providing, still showing up to every cookout, every funeral, every Sunday service, while carrying a weight most people would have set down 20 years ago and called it self-care. But sit with this too. Winning and being worn out are not opposites. A man can carry a house on his back for 30 straight years and still be standing at the end of it, and still be exhausted in a way nobody can see, because looking exhausted was never on the approved list either. So here's the truth, and I need you to actually hear this one, not just let it wash over you. Nobody's asking him to take the armor all the way off. Honestly, that would be reckless advice, because some of the rooms he still has to walk into haven't finished being dangerous. This isn't a call to unlearn 30 years of survival in a world that hasn't fully earned that trust yet. This is about one room. This is about one person. One place where the mask can come off for 10 minutes and the roof doesn't cave in. A brother he actually trusts. A therapist who understands the specific weather he grew up under, so he's not spending the whole session explaining the basics. A wife he finally, fully lets in, past the fortress and into the man. Even a quiet drive by himself, windows up, radio off, where he lets his face do whatever it actually wants to do for 3 minutes with nobody watching. Not even him. Because here's the bill that's coming, whether he opens the envelope or not. A man who never puts the armor down eventually forgets he has a body underneath it. And the body always collects, in blood pressure, in 3-hour sleep. In the silence at his own dinner table that everybody in the family just quietly agreed to call, that's just how Dad is. He doesn't need to stop being strong. He just needs one place left in his life where strength isn't the entry fee. So if you know this man, if you've been watching this and picturing somebody specific, your father, your husband, your uncle, or maybe you looked in the mirror about 4 minutes ago, do something with that. Ask him a real question. And then don't rush to fill the silence while he figures out whether it's safe to actually answer it. Sit in a car with him and leave the radio off for once. Tell him you see the weight and not just the strength that's been carrying it. You don't have to undo 30 years of armor in one conversation. Nobody's asking for that. You just have to be one safe place he doesn't have to wear it in. Because that man at the cookout sitting where he can see the whole yard, the gate, the driveway, the door, he's not only watching for danger anymore. Some part of him is still watching for somebody to walk through that door and finally tell him it's safe to rest. Before you go, one more thing. And this is the part that's going to sit with you after the video ends. That code, that armor, that entire way of moving through a room, it's not only his, it's inherited. He learned it from a father who learned it from a father who learned it from a man with even less protection than any of them ever had. It gets passed hand to hand, generation to generation, like a family Bible nobody remembers agreeing to keep, but everybody keeps anyway. And right now, somewhere, that man is teaching pieces of it to his own son. Not on purpose, not with words. Just in the way he doesn't cry at funerals. Just in the way he says, "I'm good," before the question's even finished. Just in the way he sits with his back to the wall, out of habit, at a table where nothing has threatened him in 20 years. So the real question was never whether the code was necessary. It was. It kept people alive who might not have made it without it. The real question is, what part of it gets to end with him? And what part does he finally, consciously, choose to hand down on purpose, instead of by accident the way it was handed to him? That's the inheritance that actually matters. That's the one worth passing down.